Thursday, September 5th, 2019, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. So this morning I want to talk about the person that I think is the most dangerous banker in Europe and probably the world, a person that is a convicted criminal who's taking over the ECB from the 1st of November 2019. Before that, of course, I will look at what the markets are doing. There have been some news overnight regarding the US and China trade dispute or trade war, whatever you want to call it. FT reporting here overnight, about 3 hours ago, US and China agree to restart trade talks next month from October 1st, I think it is. It says here, US and China have agreed to resume face-to-face negotiations in a bid to ease tensions in their rapidly escalating trade war, according to statements from both Washington and Beijing on Wednesday night. So that is out there. That's not Trump tweeting and then the Chinese coming back and saying, no, that's not true. One thing I would say about that, though, because people have probably now forgotten, but I have not. Back last year, March 1st, 2019, was the deadline for an agreement on trade between the US and China. So there you go. 6 months later, we're still negotiating. There's still a war going on. That's what's out overnight, and that's why the stock markets have rallied overnight. They rallied yesterday, and they're continuing to rally now. Precious metals, silver especially in particular, did very well yesterday. We've seen the gold-silver ratio drop to around 79. Gold actually did make a new high at around 1557. So that's the highest level in 6 years. We broke the recent high. So right now it's 8:09 a.m. London time. We've got gold at 1549. That's down about $3. The high's been 1553 and the low 1541. Silver is down 10 cents. So silver correcting a little bit here, underperforming gold. Is at 1949 though, and the range has been 1926 to 1963. So precious metals still looking very good, in my opinion. The Dow is up 169 or 2/3% at 26,524. S&P is up 16 at 2953. That's 0.5%. NASDAQ 100 future is up 0.75% at 77.76. I will note yesterday as well that there were quite a few Fed speakers who came out and were very dovish about monetary policy. They're starting to talk about a lot of problems from abroad and the fact that things are slowing down. So I think they're setting up probably for another cut on the 17th, on the 18th of September. FOMC meets 17th to 18th of September. I've noticed now by June next year, the market is seeing like rates at around 1%. So they're seeing loads of cuts. The market is pricing in a lot of cuts from the Fed. So currencies, yeah, the pound rallied. It seems like the more mayhem and chaos there is in the political system in this country, in the UK, the better for the pound, because it means that the market thinks this country will stay in the EU, or even if it does leave now, it will be a deal that will basically keep this country out of the EU, but just as, you know, but just as good as being in, which is even worse than it used to be. It looks like Boris Johnson has kind of lost in his gamble to do whatever he was trying to do to leave without a deal, but we're not even sure. So we'll have to wait and see. Anyway, the pound rallied quite strongly yesterday. I think over 1%. This morning, the pound is down 1/3% at 122.15. Euro is also rallied yesterday about 0.5%, back above 110. It's now at 110.29, unchanged. Dollar is unchanged against the yen, Japanese yen, 106.40. And the dollar is down 0.1% against the Chinese yuan at 714. Crude oil, WTI is at 55.85, down 0.5%. Brent back up above 60, but down a third overnight at 60.32. Bond markets yesterday, yields dropped despite the fact that the stock market rallied. I think it was because of the dovish comments from Fed officials. Overnight, though, the yields have gone back up with the news about U.S. and China trade. The 10 years back towards 150 now, up about 4 basis points. The 2-year is at 147, so that's up 3.5 basis points. So the curve has disinverted from 2s to 10s. Notice that a lot of the Fed guys who spoke yesterday talked about the yield curve, that they're concerned. So there you go. That's what's going on in the bond markets. So you probably know already who I'm going to be talking about, the most dangerous banker probably in the world. Well, it's Christine Lagarde. Christine Lagarde, she's been the head of the IMF since 2011, so for 8 years. IMF, of course, is the foreign arm of the U.S. Treasury and the Fed. U.S. Treasury, Fed, cabal. Really, they do work together. People need to wake up to that the Fed and the Treasury are one. J.P. Morgan is a big part of that. J.P. Morgan owns the New York Fed. J.P. Morgan is the banker for the U.S. Treasury. The U.S. Treasury runs the Exchange Stabilization Fund through J.P. Morgan. I remember seeing John Snow, former U.S. Treasury Secretary for George Bush Jr., visiting London, and I remember in the papers a picture of him visiting the dealing room of J.P. Morgan London. So why would a Secretary of the U.S. Treasury meet a private firm's office in London, an American private firm's office in London? Well, probably because he dealt with the guy, so he wanted to see the people he dealt with. So that's the background for Lagarde. She's trained as a lawyer. If you look at Davos, the World Economic Forum, she's always there hobnobbing with all the major players in the corporate world, all the globalists. First, before I go further into what she's been doing in the last few years, which is really interesting and concerning, I'll look at her salary, which is basically tax-free. I think anyone who works for these international organizations don't pay any tax. So there you go. She earns $500,000 basically a year for the IMF. IMF, of course, what do they do to third world countries? Well, they keep lending money to these countries, even though they know they're going to default, in order to allow the big corporations around the world, the bankers, to go there and then take over all their real assets. And that's how they enslave these third world countries. And the IMF is an important part of that. And so Lagarde has been doing that for 8 years. So yeah, she earns $467,940. And she actually needs allowance for living expenses. So $500,000 is not enough for her to live. So they need to give her $83,760 for living expenses. And here she is running the IMF, who goes to these third world countries like Argentina after the, SHIT hits the fan, and tells them that they need to be frugal, that they need to impose austerity. You see, that's the Lagarde there. So, and why am I saying she's dangerous? Well, I was reading an article like a week ago about what's been happening in Argentina. I haven't talked too much about it. It wasn't like a week ago. It was just about 3 days ago, actually. And you know, if some of you might know, Argentina is going bust again for the umpteenth time in the last 100 years. So why did they go bust? Well, the IMF lent them money. So Argentina, how IMF's biggest ever bailout crumbled under Macri. Macri is the president. So they talk about how they've had some primary elections in Argentina for the presidential election later on this year. And Macri, who's supposed to be the scion of a business magnate, when he was elected in 2015 and took over in 2016, they said, well, he's like the Trump of Argentina. He's a businessman. He knows what he's doing, right? This is what happened here. The FT article says, following days of market chaos in the wake of the vote, that was in August, Mr. Macri's government bowed to the inevitable last week and asked creditors for more time to pay back Argentina's 101 billion foreign debt, including the IMF money. So they've defaulted, right? They don't call it a default. They say reorganizing the debt, but it's as good as a default. You've seen the Argentine peso just collapsed. So I read this article and I found some interesting things. First of all, it says here, Miss Lagarde, right? The woman who's going to take over the ECB from November 1st. Don't forget. It says, Miss Lagarde is unapologetic about her leading role in lending to Argentina. And I quote, "We were the only game in town," she told the Financial Times in July. "There was nobody else at the time to invest in the recovery process through which the government had decided to engage. And given the size of the challenge, we had to go big." So that's Lagarde. Before I go further, I said she's a criminal. And I'm not like making this up. So she is a convicted criminal, according to the Independent, major newspaper in the UK. This is from December 19th, 2016. Christine Lagarde convicted. IMF had found guilty of criminal charges over massive government payout. So how come she's still head of the IMF? And she's going to be president of the ECB. Well, because these people are protected, right? They're part of the global deep state. So it says, International Monetary Fund chief Christine Lagarde has been convicted over her role in the controversial 400 million euro payment to a businessman. French judges found Miss Lagarde guilty of negligence for failing to challenge the state arbitration payout to the friend of former French President Nicolas Sarkozy. The 60-year-old, following a week-long trial in Paris, was not given any sentence and will not be punished. There you go. The Court of Justice of the Republic, a special tribunal for ministers, could have given Miss Lagarde up to 1 year in prison and a 13,000 euro fine. Well, I'm sure the IMF would have covered those fines, right? The 13,000. So she's compromised, this woman, right? She's a convicted criminal. So she's taking over the ECB. Let's continue with what happened in Argentina. The interesting thing that I found about this, though, is later in the article, the connection between the president of Argentina and the president of the United States. Not Barack Obama, Donald Trump, right? It says here, and I was surprised. So Donald Trump was heavily involved in this as well. It says, yet despite the early missteps, Mr. Macri secured a big IMF loan relatively quickly. Helping to smooth the way was his warm personal relationship with Donald Trump, president of the country with the biggest share of the votes in the IMF board. Yeah, they can veto anything, the US, Treasury and Fed cabal. So it says, this is Donald Trump. This is a quote from Donald Trump. "I've been friends with Mauricio," that's the president of Argentina, Mauricio Macri, "for a long time, many years. We knew each other very well," Mr. Trump told reporters when he arrived in Argentina in 2018. "I actually did business with his family." Mr. Trump was referring to his purchase of prime New York site for $95 million in 1984 from Mr. Macri's father, Franco. Macri caught the ear of Trump, says Hector Torres, former senior IMF official, now at the Center for International Governance Innovation, a Canadian think tank. He got Trump to believe he needed a hand, and he started lobbying via the U.S. Treasury before going to the IMF. Sure, we spoke to the Treasury, says former senior Argentine official. The situation was so delicate that it required a rapid response, and the fund is so bureaucratic that it can't act quickly enough. The fund's initial bailout for Argentina, announced on June 2018, pledged $50 billion, much more than expected. Ms. Lagarde said the money would bolster market confidence. So there you go. President of the United States, President of Argentina, buddies, right? Arranged this huge deal. They don't care if it goes sour. Doesn't Lagarde. They don't care if it goes sour. It's going to be lumbered on the American public. And if it goes bust, everything, yeah, the public will take over it. Not only the Argentine public, but the American public as well. Because those are dollars, more dollars in the system, more inflation. And how do these guys benefit? And Lagarde, well, they're friends in the corporate world. They'll be able to swoop into Argentina and buy all the, prime assets of that country. Yeah, this is how the IMF operates, the World Bank, the Federal Reserve, the Treasury. They're all there working for the corporate interests. I really recommend John Perkins' books about this. He was an ex-CIA guy who worked for these people. He was what he calls himself an economic hitman. That's what they do. They go into countries, they lend them money that they don't really need and that they know they can't pay off, and they take over that country. Yeah, it's the Confessions of an Economic Hitman by John Perkins. It was written in 2004. There's the new Confessions as well. And very interesting. And they've done the same thing to Argentina. So to say that Trump is draining the swamp is a little bit, I think, disingenuous. Reading that article just showed to me that, yeah, he wasn't trying to help Argentina. He was trying to help, the bankers, because the bankers will benefit eventually. Because this $50 billion, they don't care. They just write it out of thin air, right? So there you go. I think she's going to be the most dangerous banker. She's going to take over the ECB. She doesn't even have a background in banking. She's a lawyer. And I've noticed recently she's been calling for the European governments to launch fiscal stimulus. She shouldn't be doing that because that's not her responsibility. Her responsibility is monetary system, but I think she realizes they're running out of ammo. And I saw today again in the FT another article by someone calling for the ECB to gear up for helicopter money, and there's a picture of Lagarde in the article. So that's what I think she's gonna do. She's gonna do the same thing she did to Argentina on a huge scale on the European Union. She's going to make Europeans even more indebted. She's going to, ruin that economy, just like she's helped ruin Argentina. I know Argentina has been ruined for many years, but it's going to keep going. That's why I think she's the most dangerous banker in Europe, if not the world. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, and you can also follow me on Twitter, Steemit, and on DTube. I wish you all a great day. Take care. Bye.